Apple didn't kill Nokia. Silence did. A collective silence, chosen by the smartest people in the room. Everyone knows Nokia. The blue logo, the indestructible brick. At its peak, 4 out of 10 people on Earth held a Nokia in their hands every single day. It wasn't just a brand, it was a habit. We like to tell this story as a fable of pride. Executives in glass offices, watching Steve Jobs pull a glass slab from his pocket. The legend says they laughed. The legend says they were blind. It's a perfect story, but it's a lie. Or rather, it's a tiny fragment of the truth. The real story doesn't have any villains or fools. It only has experts. Highly intelligent, highly rational experts. If you step inside those offices with me, if you look at the world through their data, you'll realize something uncomfortable. You wouldn't have left. You would have made the exact same choice. Espoo, Finland, 2007. Nokia headquarters. Imagine you are at the top. Outside, sub-zero winds howl through the pines. Inside, it's warm. The scent of fresh coffee. A report sits on your desk. Market share, 50%. Think about that number. 1 out of every 2 phones on Earth. What's yours? A farmer in Africa. A street vendor in Beijing. A taxi driver in the Moscow snow. To the world, phone didn't mean a device. It meant Nokia. In Finland, you were more than a brand. You are the heartbeat of the nation. Your taxes funded the schools. Your exports fueled the economy. The fate of a country rested on that blue logo. Then came the shift. January 9th, 2007. San Francisco. A man in a black turtleneck pulls a glass brick from his pocket. Your engineers ran the tests. They read the teardowns. They checked every screw. Too fragile, they said. Battery is weak. No keyboard. By every standard you had, this was a toy. We can beat this, you thought. You are right about the specs, but you are wrong about the species. The iPhone didn't come to win the phone war. It came to make the phone war irrelevant. It didn't just challenge your product. It made your entire way of thinking obsolete. Now, let's move to the second location. Same building, different floor. Away from the penthouse, right in the middle. Meet the middle managers. They are the company's nervous system. Information pulses up through them. Orders flow down. And these people, they saw exactly what was coming. In 2016, Professors Timo Vuori and Hoi Kwai published a study. They interviewed the survivors of the Nokia collapse. What they found was a ghost story in the making. Many of these managers already had an iPhone hidden in their desk drawers. They felt that silk smooth screen under their fingers. They knew their own system, Symbian, was a sinking ship. They knew they were losing, but they didn't say a word. Why stay quiet? Sit in their chair for a second. Your bonus is tied to the schedule. Your budget is tied to the good news. If you say, we're failing, you lose your funding. If you say, we're slow, you lose your seat. In this building, truth wasn't an asset. It was a threat. One manager recalled a meeting with impossible deadlines. He wanted to speak up. He knew the numbers were wrong, but he looked at the bosses. His heart began to race. He chose silence. This wasn't cowardice. This was calculation. In a system that punishes bad news, the truth teller is difficult. The person who smiles and nods is a team player. When the choice is your career or the truth, most people choose the career. And that is when the horror begins. Every report going up was fixed. Every metric was beautified. Layer by layer, the reality was filtered out. By the time the data reached the CEO's desk, it was fiction. The leaders were making decisions for a world that didn't exist. No one was lying. Everyone was just telling the part of the truth that kept them safe. And 1,000 small truths added up to one giant lie. Now we enter the third room. Same building. One meeting room leads to another, and another, and another. Nokia called this matrix management. It sounds like the future. It looks like collaboration. In the golden years, it worked. It kept a giant of 60,000 people moving in the same direction. But then the iPhone arrived. The market stopped rewarding size. It started rewarding speed. Apple and Google were making decisions in days. Nokia was stuck in the hallways. Product managers remember the friction. A new feature isn't a choice. It's a marathon. It goes to one committee, then a second, then a third. Every committee has a calendar. Every manager has a veto. What takes weeks at a startup takes 6 months here. The result? By 2009, Nokia wasn't running one system. They were maintaining 57 versions of Symbian. None of them worked with the others. Think about the developer. To reach every Nokia user, you don't write code once. You write it 57 times. At Apple, you do it once and you're done. 1 is a platform. 57 is a mess. Why the bloat? Because every region wanted a special feature. Every product line claimed a unique user. There was no center. There was no one with the power to say no. There's a logic to this madness. In a culture that punishes failure, the safest move is to hide. If a project needs 50 signatures, the risk is split 50 ways. If it fails, you only own 2% of the blame. When everyone is responsible, nobody is. Every manager was just doing their job. Every suggestion was reasonable. Every meeting had a purpose. But when you add up all these perfect pieces, the final picture is a total collapse. Individual logic created a collective trap. Now, the fourth location. There is a war here. No headlines. No blood. But this war killed the future. In the mid-2000s, Nokia was split in two. One side was Symbian, the old engine, the cache, the history. The other was MeeGo, the new platform, the dream, the future. Two systems, two tribes. Symbian had the army, his thousands of engineers and deep roots. MeeGo had the vision, better tech but no political muscle. Here is the mechanism. Resources are a zero-sum game. To feed the new, you have to starve the old. The old guard didn't attack with weapons. They attacked with meetings. They raised professional doubts. They showed real numbers. They didn't say no. They said not yet. This wasn't just corporate greed. It was human loyalty. They were protecting the people who gave 20 years to the old way. From a human perspective, it's honorable. From a business perspective, it's a trap. It's like drilling a hole in the lifeboat to save the wood of the ship. The final result was the Nokia N9. It was the only one they ever made. Critics loved it. Users wanted it. But the company had already looked away. The N9 had no budget, no marketing. It wasn't even sold in its own home country. You think a great product saves a company. But a product can save a team that is already busy saving itself. Let's stop here. The story of the Nokia N9 is the hardest chapter to read. It's not a tragedy of technology. It's a tragedy of timing. The designers did the impossible. They saw the future, and they built it with their own hands. They spent years in the shadows. No budget, no backup. Just constant political friction. And yet, they delivered. When it finally hit the shelves, the war stopped. Critics called it the best phone Nokia ever made. Users said, finally, This is the Nokia we've been waiting for. It was the right product, at the right time, with the right soul. But the leaders had already looked away. Nokia had already committed to Windows Phone. So the N9 was born an orphan. No ads, no marketing. It wasn't even allowed to launch in its own home, Finland. Think about those engineers. They didn't lose the tech war. They won the tech war, but they lost the political one. They weren't defeated by Apple or Google. They were defeated by a system built on a fear and ego. Success isn't just about code. It's about culture. A great product can save a company if the company is already busy sacrificing its best people to save its own mistakes. Let's step into the testing lab. There's a machine here. It lifts a phone to a standard height. It lets go. The phone hits the concrete. Hard. Then you pick it up and it still works. The Nokia engineers are standing right there, watching their 310 bounce off the floor. Unscathed, indestructible. Then they look at the iPhone. One light tap on the edge of the screen, and the glass webs into 1,000 cracks. Their pride was real. Their contempt was sincere. It wasn't just arrogance, it was evidence. Nokia became the king of the world by mastering the physical. Their phones worked in the sub-zero winters of Finland. They survived the thick humidity of the rainforest. The 3310 wasn't just a product. It was a legend. It was the tank of the tech world. But here is the problem. In the world of hardware engineering, there is a throne. The kings are the ones who design the circuit boards, the ones who solve the physics of heat, the ones who make antennas talk through metal shells. The people writing the code, they were the help. This bias wasn't just a feeling. It was a budget. In the 2000s, software departments fought for every dollar. The status was low. The talent walked away. And this was the fatal era in an era where software was starting to eat the world. The engineers missed a shift in the question. People used to ask, will this break if I drop it? Suddenly, they were asking, does it have Angry Birds? Does it have Google Maps? Can I post this to Instagram? A Nokia phone could survive a fall from a building, but it couldn't answer those questions. You have to understand how deep this goes. It wasn't just one or two bad bosses. It was the culture. It was the air they breathed. After 10 years in that building, you believe one thing. Physical things are real. Things you can touch have value. Code is just the oil that makes the hardware move. So when the iPhone appeared, the engineers saw a fragile toy. They saw a screen that would shatter. They couldn't see the new game. They weren't bad at their jobs. They were just using eyes trained by a different era. And those eyes showed them the wrong reality. Research shows the gap was at the very top. At Apple, the leaders were software minds. At Nokia, the decision makers were hardware hearts. To a hardware mind, an app ecosystem sounds like a side dish. It's hard to see it as the main course. It wasn't a gap in IQ. It was a gap in training. The very skills that made them masters of the past became the blindfold that hid the future. Shift the city. Go to London, Paris, Frankfurt. Enter the glass offices of the giant telecom carriers. A Nokia sales executive sits at a table. Across from him, a carrier representative. Between them sits a contract. It isn't just paper. It's millions of handsets. It's billions in cash. The carrier sets the terms. They want their own software pre-installed. They want the third-party apps blocked. Certain features must be disabled, forcing the user to pay for the carrier services. It's a tax on the user experience. The executive knows this is bad. He knows the phone will feel cluttered. He knows the brain will eventually bleed. But the millions of units are right here. The billions in cash are right now. If he says no, Carrier goes to a rifle. The quarterly targets aren't met. The job isn't safe. He leans forward. He signs a deal. Now look at the other side. Look at Apple. Steve Jobs walks into the room. He doesn't ask for permission. He offers a split. We share the revenue, but we keep the control. No Carrier software on the iPhone. No Carrier Plex on the App Store. The experience belongs to the user, not the provider. The Carriers were furious. They walked out of the room. But in the end, they couldn't walk away from the market. They couldn't ignore the massive wave of users who wanted the iPhone at any cost. Nokia chose to serve the client on the paper to keep the order. Apple chose to serve the user in the street to keep the future. The verdict is already in the history books. But don't make the mistake of calling it simple. Don't assume the Nokia executive had no principles. In that moment, at that table, the future was invisible. The Carriers controlled hundreds of millions of people. That was the real market. Those were the real orders. Apple's pace wasn't a strategy yet. It was a massive gamble. It's easy to judge a choice when the results are known. It's easy to point at a mistake when you aren't the one losing billions in a single afternoon. If you were at that table, in that year, with that much on the line, what would you sign? This isn't a story of simple arrogance. It's a story of how the things that guarantee your safety today can become the very things that bury you tomorrow. Go back to the top floor of the Nokia headquarters. Not the middle managers. The people making the final calls. Research from Vuori and Hoy uncovered something critical. The top executives, they weren't blind. They knew the crisis was real. They knew their operating system, Symbian, was years away from being a true competitor. They knew they were running out of time, but they were terrified to speak. Why? Because the moment you speak the truth, the world reacts. Investors lose faith. Suppliers rethink the partnership. Carriers cancel the orders. Telling the truth felt like detonating the bomb yourself. One executive put it this way: building a new system takes years. That's why we have to keep showing confidence in Symbian. Can you see the picture? A leader sitting in a chair with two terrifying choices. Option A: reveal the truth and trigger an immediate collapse. Option B: hide the truth and accept a slow blade. They chose the slow blade. They hoped for a miracle in the lab. They hoped the market would wait. They hoped for anything but the end. There's a name for this in psychology: status quo bias. When the cost of change is loud and visible, but the cost of staying still is quiet and hidden. People choose to stay still. Selling old phones brings in cash today. Showing profit to shareholders is a win you can measure this quarter. Rebuilding an entire ecosystem? That's a gamble that takes years with no guarantee of a win. CEO Olli-Pekka Kallasvuo was caught in the middle. The board wanted profit. The engineers wanted time. The market wanted a miracle. And the media? They just wanted to know if Nokia had a future at all. By the third quarter of 2010, the answer arrived. Nokia's global market share hit 28.2%, the lowest point since 1999. The fall wasn't caused by a lack of intelligence. It was caused by a lack of courage to face the explosion. Picture a young developer. Small studio. Big decision. He opens Apple's development guide. Clear rules. One platform. Build it once and you reach every iPhone on the planet. Then he looks at Nokia. 57 versions of Symbian. Every version needs a separate test. Technical support is a ghost town. The community is silent. This isn't a tough choice. It's a survival instinct. In 2009, Nokia launches the Ovi store. They're trying to build their own stage. But the tech is broken. The apps are missing. And the support is non-existent. By now, iOS and Android have created a powerful momentum. You think it's about the hardware. It's actually about the gravity. A platform isn't just a store. It's an ecosystem that pulls you in. Nokia wasn't just late. They were standing still while the world started spinning. Now look at the customer. He's standing in the shop. He sees his friends playing Angry Birds, using Google Maps, sharing on Instagram. He asks the clerk, "Does Nokia have this?" The clerk shakes his head. The customer picks up an iPhone and walks out. It's not because the phone was bad. It's because the world inside it was empty. The clerk didn't just say no to an app. He said no to a future. September 2010. A new face. A bold move. Steven Elop becomes the first outsider to lead the Finnish giant. February 2011. A leaked memo changes the world. It's called the Burning Platform. He tells the story. An oil worker wakes up to flames. Behind him, the fire. Below him, 30 meters of ice-cold ocean. To stay is certain death. To jump is a slim chance. Nokia, he says, is a worker. And the platform is Symbian. The logic was solid. The diagnosis was perfect. He admitted what everyone knew. Nokia still couldn't match the 2007 iPhone. But honesty has a price. Nokia needed to sell 150 million more Symbian phones to fund their transformation. They needed that cash as fuel. But you can't sell a ticket for a sinking ship while the captain is shouting, "Abandoned station." Retailers stopped ordering. Customers stopped looking. The cash flow didn't just slow down. It evaporated. You don't buy a product when the maker calls it obsolete. Then came the pivot. Not Android. Windows Phone. Critics called it jumping from one fire into another. A Google executive was even more brutal. Two turkeys don't make an eagle. The results weren't an eagle. They were a crash. Between 2010 and 2014, the stock price fell 62%. Smartphone market share didn't just dip. It plummeted from 33% to 3%. In 2013, the end arrived. Microsoft bought the phone business for $7.2 billion. A company once worth $250 billion, sold for a fraction of its past. Elop was right about the fire. But by announcing it too soon, he burned the bridge they were still standing on. Truth is a weapon. If you use it wrong, you don't kill the problem. You kill the patient. From the peak in 2007 to the end in 2013. 6 years. That's how long it takes for an empire to vanish. The middle manager knew the system was failing, but he stayed silent. Truth doesn't pay the mortgage. Silence does. The committee member delayed every decision. He wasn't slow. He was safe. In a world without accountability, hesitation is a shield. The Symbian boss fought internal wars, not for power, but for his team. He protected the people who gave their best years to a dying code. The hardware expert mocked software. He wasn't arrogant. He was proud. He built phones that survived the frozen winter. He was defending the only dignity he had left. The CEO hid the numbers. He wasn't lying. He was gambling. He was waiting for a miracle that never arrived. Everyone was smart. Everyone was rational. Everyone was doing exactly what the system asked of them. But when you stack 1,000 rational choices on top of each other, you get a collective tragedy. This is the part that haunts you. It wasn't because people were bad. It was because the system was broken, and everyone played their part perfectly. We did nothing wrong, but somehow we lost. Nokia didn't collapse because of one giant mistake. It collapsed because individual logic became collective poison. Researchers call it temporal myopia, nearsightedness of the soul. When fear becomes the culture, the horizon disappears. Everyone stops looking at the future. They only look at their feet. And if you look at your feet long enough, you walk right off a cliff. Imagine if the culture was different. If bad news was a gift, and honesty was a promotion. If the manager who spoke up received thank you instead of a cold stare, would it have changed the end? Maybe not. The iPhone was a tidal wave. Some waves are too big to survive. But at least they wouldn't have spent their final moments polishing the brass on a sinking ship. Success is about the tech, but survival is about the safety to say the tech is dead.